Hi, my name is Brian Missmore. I'm the game director for Port Catherine, and this is the staff Ask Me Anything. I'm just going to grab a few questions at random from the list. We've got several, and we're going to see how this goes. Maybe we'll do 10, 15 minutes, maybe not even that. So let's see. All right, so the first question I have is, how did the idea for Port Catherine come about? So I've been kind of toying with ideas for LARPs for many years, since I was a staffer at SNC1, which I guess we'll get into in a later question. I thought about ways that I could make my own LARP and ways I could make an interesting story, and I had a couple different influences that came into mind. So one of the things I've been toying around with is doing something with guns that felt like guns were effective. I think in a lot of games you get kind of this weird thing where either guns are just swords, in which case you're doing 1 point of damage, and it doesn't really mimic what a gun does. A gun has stopping power. It stops them from coming up to you, and so having a ranged weapon that doesn't actually stop someone kind of ruins the whole point of having a ranged weapon. They get in close, they slice the hell out of you, and that's garbage. So you also get the other side of that where guns are too powerful, right? So if we had made guns, they take you out, and it's a 6-shooter, you can imagine that no one would use any weapon other than a gun, and it quickly becomes just a Nerf gun battle. I didn't think that was very interesting for Woods LARP either. So I wanted to find a way to do guns that was balanced. And so the idea that came to me was to do something in kind of this era, the 18th century, the 17th century, where your loading times are really slow. And so, yes, guns have stopping power, but you may only get one shot off in a combat, maybe two. And so that kind of naturally led itself to, well, if we're looking at the late Renaissance, early modern era, what interests me in that era to do that? And so I have a Navy background. I've read the Horatio Hornblower books. I've watched the miniseries many years ago. Loved that era. Loved the styling of it, and so that swashbuckling feel naturally became part of what came into my brainstorming as I started putting this together. There's a couple other influences. Obviously, you can see that Treasure Planet is a huge influence. I started writing up a kind of mock game for that, where there were various planets that PCs would go to, and that you'd be traveling through the Ethereum, much like in Treasure Planet, where you'd be on ships and you just kind of go through space, and that the planet was a colony far away from the rest of the planetary spheres. There'd be aliens, there'd be crazy stuff going on there. That was where I first came up with the name Port Catherine, was the idea that that was the name of that planet you were going to. As brainstorming continued, obviously, those became the islands, those became the places that you came from, they became less nation states and more part of a cohesive whole, mostly because I wanted everybody on the same side. I wanted you all working together. I didn't want you to be from competing interests that were doing diplomatic jousting. I wanted you to be from one place, all in the same goal, with different cultural changes, but ultimately united. So that's one big influence. There's another. It was a multi-user dungeon, a MUD, decades ago that I played back when I was doing text-based roleplay online. That did a thing where uh, you had farmers and they would grow food, and that would take energy to do that. But the energy output of the food was much better than the energy output that it took to make the food. And so then like cooks could take that food and the expensive energy and reinforce the energy even more. So the kind of gameplay you were doing was that you were constantly trading with other players, buying food to get energy to do things that you would need to do. And so nobles could tax farmers based on the food that they produced on their lands, and that's how nobles got energy. And then nobles would use it as energy instead of growing crops and baking food and bread and stuff like that. Nobles would use that energy to influence fashion, to make their personal colors in style, so that they could gain political points and they could use that for things. Religious people would use energy to pray, which would give their gods energy, and then staff would run as gods to do miracles using the energy. So there's this kind of constant system of energy being moved between people. I really liked that. I thought it was really neat, and I wanted to incorporate it into a LARP. I think obviously doing something that complicated or that would be a big problem logistically, but also I think you would get a situation where that you'd have to be really, really dedicated to the system to really get any gameplay out. So you can see that Port Catherine is a hybrid of that, with the landowner system, with cooks, with some of the way we use Arcanum is kind of the basis for all creation in the game. So you see hints of that. We didn't want it to be end up being limiting to gameplay or for your enjoyment. And while we think that you have to a little bit engage with the capitalist system in our game, we didn't want it to be mandatory. So that's one of the shifts from that idea. But you can see the kernels of that was in someone else's idea on an online text game I played decades ago. The final inspiration for Port Catherine was I really wanted it to feel like a real world. I wanted it to feel like you were real people in a real place, and when you pushed buttons, the right thing happened. And so that's why the economy is built the way it is, the political system is built the way it is. I wanted you to feel like you had a real impact, and not an impact that was driven by my story. So I kind of wrote a world and a bigger story that really is open-ended. And I really want you to know that we have plans in the very, written in pencil kind of sense, but as you do things, you change the direction. So a great example of that is this winter, right? So we put Queen Catherine onto the field of battle, and we sent out a number of troops that we thought could easily kill her. We had a plan for what would happen if she died. We had a plan for what would happen if she lived. You all did very well as she lived. And so we're going in that direction, which I think probably is a more positive direction for you and for what you want to come out next, but we'll see. But that's the thing. I want it to feel like a real world that you have real impact on. And so we built a lot of systems to make it feel like that. An apothecary feels like you're doing chemistry. You're playing a merchant or a banker. It feels like you're coordinating trade routes. It feels like you're doing these things. I want that to be the feel. I want, if you're a socialite, you to feel like you have to do certain things and behave certain ways to get power, to get influence. It's all grounding in the real world. So those are kind of the ideas for Port Catherine. And then, the rest, I don't want to talk too much about our meta plot, but you'll see that over the coming years. And I think you'll see where those inspirations come from, and we'll probably do one of these again. All right, so the next question is, how did you get into LARPing? So I started LARPing in 1999. I just dropped out of college. I hadn't done very well. I was kind of feeling depressed and not certain what to do with my life. And I thought, well, there's a couple different things I could do. But I was into vampire tabletop roleplay at the time. And I thought I was doing online text-based roleplay again with that. And I thought, well, there's this LARP organization called the Camarilla, and they do live action vampire roleplay. And maybe I'll just meet some people. Maybe it'll be okay. Maybe I'll try that out. So I kind of on a whim, when I embarrassed the hell out of myself in my first few games. It was a disaster. Even though I knew the world well, I didn't know LARPing. And it's a complicated LARPing system, right? So it's like you got a character sheet that you're using rock, paper, scissors to do dice rolls with. And I played that for about 10 years through a couple different revisions of that system. But really, it's nothing like what Port Catherine is, right? So it's 4 hours on a Saturday night at a university classroom that they've rented, right? Like that's what it should feel like. Some people are in costumes. Some people are wearing a T-shirt with a piece of paper pinned to it that says, "I'm wearing a 3-piece suit," right? So it's an entirely different level than you're seeing in this game. And so around 2008, 2009, I became friends with Jay Weisbrod and Hannah Servilius, and Jay was really into woods LARPing. And so really tried to get me to do it for years. And I didn't like the idea of getting hit with foam weapons. I didn't like the idea of just really being exposed to all that. And I thought it was a huge amount of work. And at one point he says, well, Brian, hey, there's this steampunk LARP called Demon Cinders that I'm thinking about getting involved in. And I think you should do that. We should make a team concept. All right, so steampunk sounds pretty cool. So maybe I'll give that a try. And so it took another 6 months. They went to a couple games. I finally came around to it and went in May of 2009, which was my first Woods LARP. It was a 3-day event. It was a long weekend. And it was crazy. I hated it. I hated every minute of it until Saturday afternoon when I fell in love with it. And stayed the entire rest of the weekend. Played every game that SNC had. After about a year or two, I shifted over to staffing. I staffed the finale of that game. I played their sequel. I played Terrace Rising. I played lots of different games. I played Witchwood, obviously. Once Legends left, I was at Legends before then. And so I kind of picked up a couple different senses of LARPing from that and really became dedicated to the woods LARPing concept, right? I like the realism. I like that you hold the money. I like that everybody's in costume. I like, I've never been a huge fan of combat, but I like that combat exists, and I like that it's an important part of the world. I think that lots of people love combat. I could take or leave it, but but I think you have to have it because I think that otherwise you don't have that conflict that drives the world. So I think that's really important. Okay, so that's how I got into LARPing. Next question, where did you learn to channel your big alpha energy? This is to me personally, I mean, this is kind of weird to me that I don't know who's sending this in, I have some guesses, but I consider myself kind of an introvert, and I also consider myself a little bit shy. I'm anxious about talking to people. I don't like telling people, hey, I want to be your friend. And so I'm not good at making friends. I don't think of myself as particularly big or alpha or energy. I suffer from depression a lot. I have a lot of issues with these things. But one thing I have practiced for many decades of my life is public speaking. So while I'm nervous, I feel pretty comfortable in public speaking. I think that makes a huge difference in how I come across at the times when you see me at opening meetings and at closing meetings at Fort Catherine. I think that's one of the things that I do really well. I want you to feel welcome, and that's really important to me. And I hope that comes across in how that's coming, and I suspect that's what this person's really speaking to. I like being down on a level. I think there's a tendency for game directors to feel really up on a hill, on a pedestal, and people kind of see them as separate and apart. I don't want to feel that way. That's why it's really important that I'm always there at check-in, I'm always there at checkout. I want to be just part of the community. I want to be building this with you. And that, yes, I have a position and it's my game, but I'm not like this special being that you should look up to. I'm just another person like you building the world, and I want you to feel like you are building the world as much as I am. It's a team effort. You bring so much to this game, well beyond anything I could do or create. And I love being there with you, but that's what I do, and that's how I think about things. And so I think that's a better answer to this question than trying to obviously trying to butter up my ego. You won't be getting more CP for that, whoever it was. All right, what's the next one? What's your favorite thing about LARPing, either as staff or as a player? That's a tough question. I love so much about LARPing. I mean, you probably got it from some of these earlier questions. So I like some of the groundedness. I like realism. I like to feel like I'm influencing a world and that my decisions matter. There was a thing years ago that was talking about character archetypes and player archetypes. What do you like in a game? And one of the things that came out was the idea of the architect. The architect likes to build things, likes to create something and have it last beyond them. And that's what I like to do as a player. I like to take a system that maybe is ignored, but it's got a lot of detail and a lot of grit to it. And I like to just tear it apart and expand it and make it something cool that other people want to do. And that makes me really excited. I like to build institutions in games that are going to last. I like to build systems that people are going to play with. And so as a staffer, I get into the very same things, right? I want you to have that experience of exploring and building out on something that's only partially defined, digging into the details, pulling things apart, seeing connections. I love that stuff. I want to give that stuff to you as a staffer. I want to experience that kind of stuff as a player. I sometimes joke that I like progress bars. I like to feel like I know where I'm going. I try to give those to you as you're going along. You'll notice there are several systems in Port Catherine where I'm like, you need this many points to invent a new schematic. And that's because I want you to feel like you know where you are and what you need to do so that you can plan and so that you can make things, goals for the future. I like doing that. It's really important to me. I have massive amounts of spreadsheets that could tell you how my character at Witchwood's CP and lessons are going to go for the next 2 years. That's how I am. I don't think everybody's like that. I certainly don't want to require that for Port Catherine, but I want to allow that and maintain that system for people who do like that. So that's something that I like that a lot. All right, what's the next question? Adrian and Brian, how are you so buff? This is another person who's obviously angling for some CP. So, I mean, the answer to that question is, you work out regularly with weights for a year and a half. So, as you may have noticed, when we started Port Catherine, I was rather overweight. I wasn't happy about it. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with being overweight, but I was feeling sick. I was feeling ill. I was tired all the time. And I was just feeling like my health was really getting impacted. And so I felt I needed to do something about it. And so I went to the gym and I signed up for personal training, which I couldn't afford. I still really can't afford it. But I thought maybe it would help with this problem and with my depression I was feeling at the time. And so I just started doing that. I started going in 3 days a week, doing full body weight training with a personal trainer. And I didn't lose any weight, but I did start feeling better. And building the foundation for when I got my diet restricted, I was able to lose weight. But that was a personal aesthetic choice for me. That's what I want to look like. It has nothing to do with, I think, my health at that point. I think the health really came from the physical fitness I wasn't getting that my body was needing. Okay, so one side effect of that is I got stronger. But I don't think it's anything that anyone should feel compelled to do. I think it's something I find fun. I think it's good for my mental health. But I mean, obviously, everybody has different hobbies. Just mine happens to be lifting heavy things off the ground. I haven't been really good about it for the last month or two. Being socially isolated in the quarantine without being able to access a personal trainer. Turns out my motivation is not very good when it comes to self-motivation, which is why that Pell deadline is really good for me for Witchwood, which I need to do by Monday. But it's also why the BGS deadline is really good, right? They force me to do stuff. Same thing with a personal trainer, forcing me to do things. I'm trying to get remotivated about working out, but it is what it is. So I'm probably a lot weaker now than I was a couple months ago. Okay, favorite weapon style to fight with, favorite weapon style to defend against. So I like two-handed sword, to be honest. That's my weapon style. I like the reach. So a staff, a two-handed sword, something with some distance. I've been playing around with a couple other things. I was playing sword and buckler sometimes over the winter, trying to see how that would feel. I obviously like guns. That's why I made an entire LARP to make them effective. I think sword and pistol is a fun style. Although, it's one of those things where you're fighting. I think at Fort Catherine, you're fighting, and then you're kind of getting that moment to just swing in and take them out once they don't pay attention to your pistol. Spears, I think, are really, really cool and effective. I often fight with a staff like it's a spear. I think spears are an underutilized weapon at Fort Catherine, especially when you consider the early 18th century time period. With guns loading as long as they do, at that time when guns took that long, you'd see a lot of spear walls defending the musketeers behind you who are reloading. I think that's really important. As far as defending against, I think it's fun when you have two people with two-handed swords fighting. I think there's a kind of ballet to it. Every crunchy in the world takes out two max-length one-handed weapons. I hate fighting against that. I can hit it because I have the reach on them, but most crunchies don't care about their health, so they just charge in, heedless of the damage they're going to take, which is one of the things that annoys me about LARP combat in general, is that you're not actually getting hurt, which stops you, right? Like if you get cut, you don't run forward anymore. So that's like my least favorite combat style to fight against. Obviously, there's the thing that everybody hates, which is things that you can't do much about. So you're dodging packets, and otherwise it hits you no matter where it is, and can take you out, a big spell. No one likes that. But, it can be fun to play the tactical game, and I think that's really interesting. One of the things, going back to when I was developing Port Catherine, is I wanted Port Catherine to break up some of those natural tactical feelings at LARPs. I wanted you to, lots of LARPs do the shield wall thing. So I just got rid of shields. I just didn't want a shield wall. I wanted guns to break up some of the natural strategies that people think about. I wanted there to be flanking, which is why you have a lot of things where you can get around the flank. Agility does that, which would give us that. Spiritualists really can break up combat if they strategically use Walk with Spirits. So I really wanted to break up some of these normal LARP tactical things to create new tactical questions that I thought would be interesting. And so a lot of things in the way we designed the early system were designed to rethink a lot of these basic assumptions that people make about LARP. All right, so this is the last one I'm going to take. There's many more you asked, but I can only answer so many in this amount of time. So the last one is, what was your favorite book series in middle school? So I love this question because it's a lot easier to answer than what is your favorite book or what is your favorite book series now. That would be really tough. Middle school, I know exactly what I did. So in middle school, I read the Xanth series. That's Xanth, for those who are not familiar with Piers Anthony. It's a young adult novel series that he started writing the year before I was born and has continued writing one a year ever since. And that includes last year. So, given the math there, I'm going to tell you how old I am, but he's written 42 novels in that series, which is crazy to me. That meant in middle school, I was reading the first 13 to 15 of them. He wrote them originally for adults, but they're very childish, and so you quickly outgrow them. I have no idea who in the world is reading 40 of these things. I probably read about 15 before I got old enough that they became too childish for me. But it's a kind of a fun, light fantasy world. Everybody in the world gets at least one magical spell they can cast, and only one magical spell. And so it comes down to the creativity of how good that is, or if you've got a good one, or if you just got a bad one. Um, I haven't read it in decades. It's almost certainly a terribly problematic series. It was started right in the late 70s, you can imagine. But that's what I read. Light fantasy. It's hopeful. The good guys tend to win. All the things you'd expect from early 80s fantasy. Um, I really liked it. That's what I read in middle school. I grew out of it, as we all do. I didn't have Harry Potter. I didn't have some of these options, so that's what I read. It shocks me that he has written 42 of them and he's writing them now. I can't even imagine what they must be like. All right, so those are all the Ask Me Anything questions that I'm going to take for right now. I think this has probably been a way too long video already, but I wanted to get something out because I miss you all, and I can't wait to get back LARPing with you in the fall. I really, really enjoy and love running Fort Katherine. I love the way you've built into this world. I love the way you love it. I love the way that you talk about it constantly all through the winter. Um, that makes me feel an incredible amount of happiness, and I love bringing that to you and to tell this story. We've got many, many more years planned. Hopefully we'll ever be able to continue playing, but I look forward to it, and I miss you, and I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you're getting through this. I think that's all we can expect right now, is just to survive the next few months, um, and probably survive the next year, and get back to our lives, and remind each other how much we care about each other and how much we miss each other. And that's what I'm here doing this for. So I'll see you all soon, and take care.